In an investigative report last year, the Berkshire Eagle pointed out that it's taken longer to get broadband internet access to all of Western Massachusetts than it took to put a man on the moon. And while getting the internet to all of the homes and small businesses in the Hilltowns of this region isn't complete yet, it is a smaller leap than it was just a year ago. So what's the status of the so-called last mile? Here's what reporter Larry Parnass said.
A lot of progress in the last year, and mostly because towns that decided to go their own way and build their own publicly owned systems have all found a partner that is like delivered from the gods. It's Westfield Gas and Electric, which had really been a leader for fiber optic connectivity in Westfield. It went to a conference with towns a year and a half ago, and suddenly it is now representing 20 towns as their procurement coordinator and a designer, bringing in a lot of outside help. But the bottom line is that many towns in the next 12 months to the end of 2019 are going to actually light up locally owned municipal systems that have been aided by this really, I think, pretty effective push from the Massachusetts Broadband Institute in the last year.
Which was kind of the state agency that had been tasked with looking at this issue and taking it on in various capacities. But in the early 2000s, wasn't the argument that the local way to go was too expensive, wouldn't be effective? Was that the way it was looked at?
Well, you know, this goes back to 2008. I remember Governor Patrick came to the town of Goshen for a big reveal that this was their moment to let's deal with the digital divide.
And this was going to be all wrapped up by 2011.
A little bit after that, I think. But then the recession came, and then the administration changed, so Massachusetts got a new governor. Along the way, there were some peaks and valleys in terms of movement forward. And I can kind of date it from when my youngest child was coming through high school, because we had to go out and get a satellite dish in our remote rural town in Ashfield. And I thought, well, I got to have it because she's in high school. She's got to be able to do her homework. Well, she's long out of college by now, and we still don't have high speed.
Wow.
So lots of fits and starts. I think the key moments in that were the decision to invest a lot of time and attention in building the so-called, ready for it?
Yeah.
Middle mile.
Exactly.
Which turns out to be a misnomer because it never proved to be the middle that led to last mile connections to homes and businesses.
And the idea, based on your reporting and my previous reporting, as I understand it, that middle mile was really kind of if you're thinking about a highway, and then the last mile is kind of the side streets, right?
Yes,
Connecting smaller businesses, maybe run out of your own home, and then those actual homes. But middle mile might connect like the fire department or the library or public schools, things like that.
That's what really sold it, Carrie, the fact that we're going to bring high-speed broadband service to rural areas, and there were 123 that this middle mile system, Mass Broadband 123, came through.
Hence the number.
$90 million, state and federal money. If there hadn't been stimulus money available, this would never have been constructed. It did at least bring high-speed access to quite a few municipal buildings, including public safety buildings. But as time went on, and you mentioned, I hope we'll talk about the litigation, which has finally come through kind of a critical moment here, which has offered a lot of takeaways on what went wrong.
Really kind of dissected it. We talked about the arbitrator's decision before we started rolling. That's what you were referencing there a minute ago.
But the middle never proved to be a middle because what's been revealed now is that the big parties, the national players like Comcast and Charter, that were supposed to take this middle mile and then go from there to customers, that was not the critical piece of it. The costly part is going up and down these little rural roads all over Western Massachusetts.
Spaced apart without many homes or people who would pay the bill at the end of that last mile, right?
That's the reason that they have a threshold of how many addresses per mile that they'll reach out to. Private business has to make a profit, and it's not profitable to go into these really sparsely settled areas. That was the problem. It wasn't that they couldn't connect on the back end to the internet. They could have made that happen, and they do in rural areas.
But based on your most recent reporting on this, focused on the arbitrator's decision, looking at mass broadband, didn't they sort of look at it and say mass broadband overpromised? Is that a correct way to sort of boil down hundreds of pages of legal documents?
Yeah, actually it was 1 million pages.
Yeah.
I wonder if the arbitrator actually read all those pages.
Lots of
I think the arbitrator had to absorb it. This is Phil O'Neill Jr., who both parties agreed would reach a conclusion here. The overpromise on the overpromising, the contract that MasTech signed with its eventual network operator for the middle mile, which was a Canadian company from the Canadian Plains, Axia Net Media is the name of the company. That contract said that they would have a certain number, or led them to believe they would have a certain number of customers for this new network. And as the arbitrator determined that the actual number of customers was far fewer, even a MasTech CFO, Chief Financial Officer, at the point of turning this over to their new network operator, MasTech knew, according to the arbitrator's findings, that they were not turning over a sustainable system. And yet MasTech resisted Axia's efforts to fix it. And that led to $2 million a year losses, and suddenly so much litigation that they couldn't fight their way out of it until they finally got this arbitrator's assistance.
And the decision really is $12 or so million outright at the outset that they have to pay out, and then possibly another $4 million on the line. And is that all taxpayer money?
I believe there were some bonds that MasTech had to take out. Now, I don't know whether those can be applied to this kind of decision. But along the way, some of the legal skirmishing was over, is this system going to collapse? And that was, a lot of stories that I wrote over the past year or so were about, gee, is the middle mile suddenly going to, rupture and not be providing access to its customers?
Do we know then what that means for the actual middle mile completion or it moving forward instead of falling apart, as was the concern?
Yeah, this was Holyoke Gas and Electric was the company that worked with MasTech, one of many who responded to a request for proposals, sort of in the thick of the bankruptcy filing and just a lot of uncertainty about who would be operating this thing. These are the terms that they reached knowing what this network actually consists of. So it's believed to be financially sustainable now. And the translation there is the operator has to pay a lot less money to the state for the right to operate the network. And that's going to avoid the losses that have just plagued Axia and its partners.